This is The Other Side with Damian Curry.
And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies. They are not our enemies. They are Americans. They're Americans.
You chose hope and unity, decency, science, and yes, truth.
So, Conservatives are Americans, but in the next breath, they're being implicitly told that they're not decent, scientific, or truthful. Division among the Democrats. Can Joe control the new woke left, who are now going to think they've won an election when all they did was not cause their party to lose another one? We'll discuss. Ray Radowski will join us to talk legal challenges to the election count. Are they real, or are Trump supporters clinging to false hope? We'll at least be discussing it here, instead of calling it baseless and just dismissing it, as most of the Australian media are doing wrongly, I think. Alexandra Marshall will join us to discuss bonking and bullying in Canberra, the calls for more state control of the media in our land of the not-so-free, and sowing more division in the name of unity, the woke left's latest push to change the Australian national anthem. G'day and welcome to episode 12 of The Other Side Australia. I'm Damian Curry, and this is your free weekly podcast that fills in all the bits the mainstream media leaves out. Let's get going. But first, a great piece in the Brisbane Courier Mail this week with Kylie Lang writing, "At least one Premier is putting on her big girl pants and calling for an end to petulance. And it's high time Annastasia Palaszczuk did the same instead of immaturely allowing a personal vendetta to cloud her already foggy judgment on border closures." Kylie Lang writes, "What is this? Year 9? She says the re-elected Premier has been described as childish and a brat after her apparently juvenile response to an olive branch text from Berejiklian. On Sunday night, the 1st of November, the day after the Queensland state election that saw Annastasia Palaszczuk return to power, Ms Berejiklian sent this text, according to the Courier Mail. "Hi Anastasia, congratulations on your election win. I can imagine how difficult that was during a pandemic. I hope we can work together to get our borders open. Gladys." But Ms Palaszczuk waited 3 days to respond, texting back one word, Queenslander, after the first state of origin win on November 4.
Yeah. I haven't heard what she said today, but can I make it very clear? On Sunday evening, I texted her to congratulate her on her election win and said I was keen to talk about borders. I did not hear from her until last night when she sent me a text about the state of origin. That's
New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian. Queensland should be open to Greater Sydney, and Victoria should follow, the Courier Mail suggests. But they say the Queensland Labor leader is digging in her heels like a defiant schoolgirl. But the New South Wales Premier has noted that all of this has turned into a personal standoff, something she says she regrets ever happened. The Courier Mail says that for months we've watched, growing more tired by the minute, as sniping between the pair allowed political colours to trump common sense. Gladys Berejiklian appeared on the Today Show with Carl Stefanovic on the 9 network just before this week's Rugby League State of Origin clash between the two states.
We're obviously looking forward to the Victoria-New South Wales border coming down on the 23rd of November, Carl. That is a big deal for us in New South Wales. And certainly, Carl, what's really important to me and what's really important for families and for jobs is to have no borders within Australia. And certainly New South Wales will be the first state where that's the case. And I'm urging other states to be compassionate and to think about jobs, because otherwise the economic consequences of the pandemic will be very dire next year in particular, and I don't want to see families going through more stress than they already are.
I think I know who you're talking about. I mean, can you believe Queensland might open its borders to Victoria before Sydney City?
Look, I'm just mortified by that notion. I think it's cruel, I think it's unjustified, and I think it's spiteful. And there's no health or scientific basis to it. New South Wales has demonstrated that you can manage the pandemic by keeping the health facts or keeping the community safe, but also by keeping people in jobs and keeping people mobile and relatively free in a COVID-safe way. We've shown that you can strike that balance. And I worry about the citizens of Queensland as much as I worry about the citizens of New South Wales. And Carl, it also is very frustrating because every week we're welcoming back through Sydney 3,000 Aussies coming back home. A lot of them are Queenslanders or West Australians. Those states aren't lifting their weight on that. We're doing the heavy lifting. But we do it because we're Australians as well as being from New South Wales. And I think it's appropriate that people frankly recognise that and weren't so cruel and weren't letting politics get in the way of good health.
Annastasia Palaszczuk was elected partly because of her strong stance on the borders. The more people fire up about it, the more she retains her position, her some might say stubborn position, but it's her position that reflects the whim of her people that voted her in. She's not going to change. She's not going to do anything other than the medical advice that she's been given the whole way along.
Yeah, but I don't know what that medical advice is based on. I've never ever heard that 28-day period. I've never even heard having to trace each source of infection within 2 days. I don't know where that's come from. I mean, because sometimes I think we've got the best contact tracers in Australia, if not in the world here in New South Wales. Sometimes it can take hours to find a source. Sometimes it can take days. Sometimes, Carl, it takes weeks to get all the genomic sequencing matching right. So that's what the health facts are.
Yeah.
You can't dispute that. That's a reality. So why Queensland has given us that 48-hour deadline, I don't know, because it doesn't seem to exist anywhere else.
Well, you voted for it, Queensland, so I suppose you'll just have to suck up that health and economic consequences of the border closure a little bit longer. Queensland now has a new state opposition leader, thank goodness. David Crisafulli, an MP from the Gold Coast, will take over the helm from Deb Frecklington following Frecklington's election loss. 4 MPs challenged for the leadership position. Let's hope that's not a sign of ongoing disunity in the LNP. One thing they need to do on that side of the aisle is get their act together in terms of unity. A unified plan, unified messaging, a unified approach, and presenting a viable alternative government to the Queensland people for the next 4 years, so that hopefully they'll become the real government in 2024.
This is The Other Side with Damian Curry, a new podcast for the quiet Australians. Tell your friends to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube, and all major podcast platforms.
So, America. What a strange time this is for the world's great democracy. Given his lead after the vote count switch last week, it was a predictable and sensible move for the Democrats to stamp their legitimacy on the win with a big show and declaration of victory. It makes sense. There is enough of a lead to justify it. What there isn't enough of a lead to justify is Donald Trump conceding. The calls for him to do so are an attempt by the Democrats to play up the narrative that Trump is being a sore loser or will try to stage some kind of coup and refuse to leave the White House. No, it's actually completely appropriate for Donald not to concede yet. Joe needs the legal process to run its course just as much as Trump does, for the sake of his credibility and legitimacy as president for the next 4 years, if he ultimately wins, which seems likely at the moment. At the big event in Delaware on Sunday, we got a taste of what a Joe Biden presidency might look like. And there were some positive signs for classical liberals and conservatives. The centrist messages seem to be making their way into Joe's speech, a real gesture of outreach to the 71 million disappointed Trump voters and their non-voting friends. At first, there was all the usual cliches about how I ran as a Democrat, but I'm going to govern for all Americans. And there's no blue states and red states, there's just the United States. Where have we heard that one before? But Joe's not known for his originality in writing his speeches. In any case, he then went on to deliver these messages, much more conciliatory sounding.
For all those of you who voted for President Trump, I understand the disappointment tonight. I've lost a couple times myself, but now, let's give each other a chance. It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again. And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies. They are not our enemies. They are Americans. They're Americans. We will lead not only by the example of our power, but by the power of our example.
There was certainly plenty more cheesy cliches where that one came from. And at times it just sounded like Joe was stringing random phrases together. But towards the end of the speech, there were some messages that sounded like the sensible centrist Democratic Party of old, the classical liberalism inherent in traditional American values, rather than the new victim-oriented the world owes me something leftism of the woke generation. Joe began to speak of things like individualism, rising up above life's adversities and what you dealt, and taking personal responsibility.
I've always believed we can define America in one word: possibilities. That in America, everyone should be given an opportunity to go as far as their dreams and God-given ability will take them. You see, I believe in the possibilities of this country. We're always looking ahead to an America that's freer and more just, ahead to an America that creates jobs with dignity and respect, ahead of America that cures diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's, ahead to an America that never leaves anyone behind, ahead of America that never gives up, never gives in.
Wow. Republicans should be pleased to hear that. But the question is, will Joe have the strength to deal with the new left in the Democratic Party? Groups like the Justice Democrats, who support New York 20-something I Know How to Fix the Whole World Congresswoman AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who sadly got re-elected. The Bernie crowd won't like any of that personal responsibility talk. They just want to know what America will do for them, not what they can do for America. And they embrace that wacky economic theory called MMT, Modern Monetary Theory. The idea that the government can just keep on printing money forever because, they've got the printing presses after all. Economic geniuses, that lot. But they're powerful, the left, because the left won the culture wars. If you don't think so, just watch any major network late-night talk show in America, or any Australian mainstream news show for that matter. And I don't see Joe being able to hold them back and save the Democratic Party, let alone America. Especially not with one of the wokiest vice presidents ever. I mean, it's great to see a woman there at last. As a half-brown person myself, I already knew that we were quite capable, thanks, so I don't care about the colour of her skin. But a female in the White House is long overdue. I just wish it was a conservative female. At least conservatives are upfront about what we believe. The Democrats make you think they're all sugar and spice and empathy and unity, but there's a heck of a lot of insult by omission going on every time they open their mouth.
You chose hope and unity, decency, science, and yes, truth.
So you hear that, Republicans? You're not decent or scientific or truthful. You might even be a bit deplorable. It's the same old narrative we've had from the Democrats since the early part of this decade. And it's not going to change. We're going to get 4 more years of it now because they think they won when all they really did was not lose another election. Well, did they win? That's another question, which we're going to explore with Ray Rudowski in just a moment. Joining me now is our North America expert, Ray Rudowski. As usual, Ray, welcome again for the second time this week. Just for those listeners who didn't catch it, we did do a special edition episode on Monday night on the election. We did a deep dive on some numbers there. If you'd like to go back and have a listen to that, it's still online. It's episode 011S for special edition. We're now on episode 12. Ray's with us live on the line. Ray, state of play now. We're a few days on. Where are we at just in terms of the overall count, not getting into any sort of issues about whether there might be recounts or anything yet? Just where are we at on the media's preferred numbers?
Well, it depends on which media you look at. The majority of the mainstream media has called it for Biden. But what's really significant in the last couple of days is that the website Real Clear Politics, which is a widely respected aggregator and news site of political opinions, withdrew its call for Biden and put Pennsylvania and Arizona in the uncalled category.
So Real Clear Politics is saying that it's not actually 279 to 217, 279 being for Biden, which gives him the 270 that he needs to be president. It's actually 259 for Biden to 217, and they've taken Pennsylvania out of the mix again.
So that suddenly means that there's a wide open field for discussion, for lawsuits, and for the potential and a path to victory for Trump.
Let's look at the closest states. At the moment, we've got Georgia with 99% of the vote counted. The gap between them is only 14,000 votes out of 5 million. So that's Biden leading with 14,000 votes in Georgia. Another super close one is Arizona, which is 11 electoral college votes. They've got 11,600 gap between them, with Biden leading out of 3.3 million voters. So 11,600, not terribly much there. Wisconsin, Biden is only 20,000 votes ahead out of 3.2 million. And in Pennsylvania, out of 7 million voters, Biden is only 53,000 ahead. I mean, this is the sort of level of lead, though, that would be hard to close at this point in a lot of these states, wouldn't it, Ray?
It would be, except that with these various irregularities, one of the big irregularities in a number of these states is the number of dead people on voter rolls who have voted. So that's an allegation of fraud. Otherwise, fraud is very difficult to prove. So the irregularities fall into other categories, like the idea that in Michigan, there was a software glitch in voting machines, which have been used in, I believe, 31 states. So that gives a lot more meat to the possibility of recounts or removing ballots that may be questionable. It's very interesting. If you watch Tucker Carlson's show, he started reading the obituaries of people who died in Nevada, in Georgia, and in Pennsylvania.
I thought the way Tucker framed things on Fox News on the his program of the 11th of the 11th was quite good. Let's just have a little listen to Tucker Carlson's a little bit of Tucker Carlson's opening there on this question of dead people voting.
There was massive outside interference in our democracy, and it didn't come from Russia. The tech monopolies of Silicon Valley used their unprecedented control over news and information to silence Donald Trump's voters and at the same time to protect Joe Biden. And then public health authorities and blue state governors wielded the pandemic like it was a partisan political weapon. Democrats completely changed the way we voted in this election. Our system has never been more disorganized, and it's never been more vulnerable to manipulation. So was there voter fraud last week? That's a question we've been working on since election night. We've tried to be careful and precise as we report this out. In moments like this, truth really matters more than ever. False allegations of fraud can cause as much damage as the fraud itself. What we're about to tell you is accurate. It's not a theory. It happened, and we can prove it. Other news organizations could prove it too. They've simply chosen not to. The position of corporate media across the country this week has been very simple. There was no voter fraud. The New York Times, once the paper of record, declared that as fact this morning across the entire front page. Look at this banner headline. Election officials nationwide find no fraud. No fraud, none. End of story. Move on and listen to Kamala. Right now, fewer than 15,000 votes separate Donald Trump from Joe Biden in the state of Georgia. It's close enough that it's worth getting specific about what happened there. And Georgia's Secretary of State has now confirmed there will be a hand recount of all votes cast in Georgia.
So, Ray, that's Tucker Carlson on Fox News. He then went on to list at least 25 names that his team have clarified were dead people who had voted in the election.
And no one quite embodies that story like James Blaylock of Covington, Georgia. Mr. Blaylock was a mailman for 33 years until he passed away in 2006. 14 years later, according to state records, he was still mailing things. James Blaylock cast a ballot in last week's election. How did he do that? It might be worth asking the New York Times. Maybe James Blaylock was just one of those extraordinary mail carriers. Neither rain, nor snow, nor gloom of night, nor even death itself could keep him from the mail. In his case, maybe voting from the grave wasn't really fraud, it was just commitment. Okay, but what about Linda Kessler of Nicholson, Georgia? Linda Kessler died in 2003. 17 years later, she was still voting in presidential elections. Edward Swinott of Trenton, Georgia, spent his life working construction and teaching school. In his spare
and you get the idea. It just goes on and on and on. Tucker Carlson there, some fantastic work from his show on Fox News on the 11th of the 11th, if you want to check that out. Ray, I guess the bigger question is, is the number going to be significant enough? If this is fraud going on with these dead people registered voting, is there going to be enough to overturn the sort of 12, 14,000 differentials we're seeing in some of the closer states that are putting Joe Biden in front?
We don't know. But what's, I think, important in all of these various lawsuits is to have discovery, right? And that's where both sides can look at what's on the table, what evidence are there, what affidavits from various witnesses.
Just get the evidence out and get it looked at.
In some of these allegations. Now, the bigger story that Tucker brings up is the fact that there doesn't seem to be any impetus from the Democrat side for this transparency.
No, I find that interesting. And they need it. They need it. If they think they can just steamroll 71 million people who are very passionate about Trump and then call for unity and they talk about empathy, which I find hypocritical given the circumstances, I find that amazing. Joe Biden needs this process to play out so that he can say it went through the courts, the whole thing played out, it's fully legitimate. It's okay for him to do his PR thing and grab the momentum and have his little, stage performance last weekend. That's fine. But Trump shouldn't be being asked to concede at this point. There's quite valid and sensible reasons why Trump shouldn't be conceding, and the Democrats should be supporting the notion of ensuring that they get to the bottom of any irregularities or any problems, Ray.
Well, absolutely right. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up was the crux of the lawsuit in Pennsylvania. It's a constitutional argument that puts forward the idea that mail-in balloting created a two-tiered voter system, which is unconstitutional in the sense that those who voted in person were subject to greater scrutiny, signatures, ID, various checks, where those who voted by mail did not have to go through those checks. And from a constitutional point of view, that calls into question the integrity of the electoral process. And I think that is something that would be an argument across the country. Yeah,
it truly is hard for a lot of people, I think, particularly in Australia, where we have the Australian Electoral Commission that oversees all elections, and we really do have probably the world's gold standard in terms of running elections. It's hard for us to imagine that America could be this poor at having all of this sort of streamlined. Tucker Carlson, also, just to go back to him for a moment, he had some thoughts on this, and I thought, again, he put it quite well.
Dead people tend to vote more often when you make it easier for them to vote. They're like any other group, and this year we made it much easier for the dead to vote. One 2012 study by Pew found there were close to 2 million dead people still on voter rolls around this country. That study also found that approximately 24 million voter registrations, that is 1 out of every 8 in America, were wrong. Close to 3 million people in America had registrations in more than one state. 3 million. So what happens if you start sending ballots and registrations to lists like this? Well, you're guaranteed to increase the amount of fraudulent voting. And that's exactly what Democrats did. Republicans, we should add, let them do it. Who did this? We don't know who did it. We wish we did. We should know. It's fraud. It's a threat to our system. And it's being hidden by a news media totally vested in a Joe Biden presidency. None of this is conjecture. It's not one of those bogus conspiracy theories that CNN worries about. It is entirely real. Why did it happen? How can we prevent it from happening again? Those are the questions.
Yep. And they're questions that really need to be answered very, very soon by America. I think it's critical that they get to the bottom of this. And it's critical for Trump. It's critical for Biden. It's critical for America and the entire confidence in the electoral process that all of this goes on. I don't think Donald Trump did himself any favors with his news conference and the hyperbole that he used and the subsequent tweets about widespread voter fraud. He's still applying the formula you apply to communications when you're the candidate and he's now at the end of his presidency. He didn't really work it out, did he? That he's the president and he could exert a lot more power with very statesman-like, calm statements. All he had to say in that news conference was, we have to be patient, we have to wait, we have to let the due legal process run its course. There really are serious questions here about a number of claims of tampering and voter fraud. This is as important for Mr. Biden as it is for me, and let's just wait and see. And I assure everybody that when the result is clear, there will be a smooth transition. That's all he had to say to win over a lot more support than he's probably got right now, and to give himself a lot more credibility. Because there is now quite a double standard there, with the Democrats saying that everyone should just shut up and accept that Biden is the president, accept the result and move on.
Well, there is a double standard, and it's very ironic that following the results of the 2016 election, the Democrats spent the better part of 4 years questioning those results in the form of a Russiagate investigation alleging collusion with the Russians, which didn't pan out, an impeachment, which didn't pan out. So, no, they didn't handle the 2016 results as well as they could have. And now they're calling into question legitimate arguments over voter fraud, irregularities. And when you look at the variety of media coverage, one of the more interesting things that I found, and I think you should include a link to this in the description, is a story that I found where someone analyzed that under the U.S. State Department's own guidelines, that the U.S. election, this latest one, fit the category or the criteria of a rigged election. And they based this around the idea that back in 2004, the State Department looked at the results of the Ukrainian election, and they found things like, abnormally high use of absentee ballots, software glitches, all sorts of other shenanigans, that if you removed the word Ukraine and inserted the word United States 2020, it would fit the description by the State Department of a rigged election. Yeah, there is a lot of questions about this.
We all know. We all know how much Joe loves the Ukraine.
Another more interesting allegation that's come forward that the media doesn't seem to really want to take a deeper dive in is this Maiden Gate allegation, and it's the allegation that
Maiden
in some states, women found that someone else had voted using their maiden name. Now, whether that's significant enough to flip the election, but the New York Times and on all these other mainstream media sites aren't even questioning whether Maiden Gate is a real thing.
The more that they say shut up and move on, Ray, the more suspicious I am that there is something here. And I think we should finish up with none other than Whoopi Goldberg, who really delivered some beautiful messages of empathy and unity on her TV show, The View. Let's have a listen to Whoopi.
Now, I want to bring something up right now. I want to say to all those people who don't believe that Americans actually got out and voted, let me say this to you. When you know who was elected 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton didn't say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right, stop the count. She didn't say, this isn't right, I'm not going for it. She didn't say any of that. So all of you, suck it up. Suck it up like we sucked it up. And if you are not sure that you're comfortable with Joe Biden, do what we did. Find things and then take it to the law. And if the law says it's something to look at it. But from now on, suck it up. Grow the pear for him that he can't grow for himself. Because this is ridiculous. You're not sure that he won. You're bringing into question all these Americans who voted legally, came out and stood and voted. How dare you question it?
So that was Whoopi Goldberg on The View telling us to suck it up like they sucked it up in 2016. I don't recall them sucking it up in 2016. I think there was a march and there was a,
No, I think Dennis Miller summed it up by every so often he would put on his Facebook page. I don't think Hillary handled the results of the 2016 election as well as she could have.
But nevertheless, unity and empathy, my friend. Unity and empathy. We've got to keep on that line.
Unity and empathy, or else.
Exactly. I did say Whoopi would be the last one, but let's have a listen to you. I forgot to mention your quote you sent me from Mike Pompeo,
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, yeah.
Hi.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Right? We're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence that the transition necessary to make sure that the State Department is functional today, successful today, and successful with the president who's in office on January 20th, a minute afternoon, will also be successful. I went through a transition on the front, and I've been on the other side of this. I'm very confident that we will do all the things that are necessary to make sure that the government, the United States government, will continue to perform its national security function as we go forward.
So you believe there's widespread voter fraud, that the reports that we're getting from Pennsylvania, from Michigan, showing vote totals in massive leads or significant leads with 99% reporting are going to be overturned, and that the United States failed to conduct a fraudulent free election?
Rich, I'm the Secretary of State. I'm getting calls from all across the world. These people are watching our election. They understand that we have a legal process. They understand that this takes time. Right? It took us 37 plus days in an election back in 2000. We conducted a successful transition then. I'm very confident that we will count, and we must count every legal vote. We must make sure that any vote that wasn't lawful ought not be counted. That dilutes your vote if it's done improperly. We've got to get that right. When we get it right, we'll get it right. We're in good shape.
Should foreign leaders not be calling
we're
President-elect Biden?
It was next. Yeah.
So again, I think that there's this idea of, oh, he should concede, he should concede, he should concede. But the other side's idea that we're not going to concede, it's not over until it's over, hasn't really been played out.
Mike Pompeo trolling, I think, a little bit there, stirring the pot and making light. Ray Rudowski, mate, thank you so much for all your help over the past couple of weeks. The story's not over. If there's any radical development in the next few days, we may do another extra special episode on Monday. If not, I'll catch you next Friday morning at the usual time.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
And joining me now from glorious New South Wales is Alexandra Marshall. Alexandra, welcome to the show.
You didn't use all my normal introduction adjectives.
What's sorry. I'm so sorry. Alexandra Marshall, the queen of Australian libertarian, conservative and classical liberal Twitter. Welcome to the show. Better?
That's much better, Damian.
Thank you very much. Bonking and bullying we're starting with today. I apologise to all of our conservative listeners, but yeah, some interesting stuff going on in Canberra, and a lot of it reported in a Four Corners program this week on the ABC. Four Corners being one of the shows that I probably wouldn't axe if I was running the ABC. Although, I mean, they usually do very, very good current affairs, but in this case, a little bit more new idea than anything else, Ellie.
Well, unfortunately for all your viewers, it wasn't particularly interesting, a bit of a non-event for all the media press that it got. And I rather hate you because you made me watch this horrible Four Corners production by the ABC, and it was totally cringeworthy and had all the melodramatic music. And what it amounted to was basically politicians drink too much and occasionally shag their staff, which I think pretty much anybody could tell you from the last couple of thousand years of politics.
Yeah, it sort of did pass the beat-up test, didn't it? It really did seem to be a stretch. And she seemed to be conflating the idea that there was some sort of cultural problem within Canberra, which there might have been. Turnbull said something about it being like the corporate world 40 years ago, which if is true, then it does need to be fixed up a little bit. But I find that hard to believe. She seemed to be trying to make a story out of that and then connect it to this sort of consenting adult affair that had gone on, or a couple of incidents that had gone. It just failed on every level. It looked like a hatchet job, an attempt at a hatchet job that just didn't work.
What they seemed to be doing was enacting Turnbull's little revenge dream on some of his staff members by talking about a couple of drinks and the odd affair that some of the MPs had with their staffers. And I might add, these are completely voluntary affairs. It's not like there's any accusation of wrongdoing. It's more like hurt feelings.
There's not a single accusation of sexual harassment other than a general cultural. That was what I meant by conflating things a little bit. I felt that the reporter, is it Louise Mulligan or Lisa Milligan or something? She is the one that did the book on Cardinal Pell and sort of, had scant regard for Australia's due legal process, and I'm not getting into the Pell debate or anything, but basically she's known to be someone who drives a pretty strong critical theory kind of agenda through her reporting. It seemed in this case that there were no specific instances of sexual harassment in the workplace. It was all consenting sexual relationships.
Yes, let me talk about what was really on the screen, not what they wanted you to see. Basically, it became very obvious that Malcolm Turnbull managed to collect dirt on some of his MPs, which was who they were sleeping with at the time, a couple of inappropriate relationships. And then he promoted those MPs and introduced the bonking ban so that he forever had blackmail material on those MPs, which is a sort of power-broking activity that he was engaging in, which he's now just thrown into the wolves because he obviously needs some more press because they're doing the whole Murdoch Royal Commission at the moment. But I'd like to point out that Turnbull gets on screen and says that the Liberal Party has a problem with women, while he was perfectly happy to fight out Julie Bishop for the role of Prime Minister when he was looking for a new job. So he doesn't really care about the problem of women in the Liberal Party. And I'd also point out that the Liberal Party's had women promoted to higher positions of power before Labor on their merit, not their quota. That most of the public, when I floated this online earlier, are not interested in the marriages and affairs of MPs in Canberra. Everyone assumes Canberra's a pit. No one really cares. What we're worried about are the marriages and affairs that MPs have between lobbyists and business, which is where the real conflict of interest comes from and which nobody in the press really wants to talk about. I think the ABC wanted to do a bit of a hit piece on the Liberal Party, and there were plenty of MPs ready for the press traction. People like Sarah Hanson-Young, who were all too happy to get in front of the camera, despite allegations of her own treatment of her staff and misuse of public funds. And she's one of those people who managed to sue over this whole thing and collect a bit over $100,000 herself. And Christina Keneally was also featured, and she was worried about sexism. So as you can see, there wasn't really any substance. It was a couple of photographs of MPs at a bar and a woman who was upset that the situation she got herself into, a completely consensual relationship, that broke down, which is how life works. And I think we are reading far too much into this melodrama nonsense. I mean, welcome to the real world, kids. Adults have relationships. You have to manage them yourselves. Nobody really cares what you've got yourself into. Just act like adults and do your jobs, and then everyone goes home happy. So don't make me watch this again, Damian. It's such nonsense on the ABC.
All right. Now, look, I want to just mention the development of the story after the show went on when it was the Minister Alan Tudge who was the one that has admitted that he was involved in this affair with his senior media advisor or one of his senior media advisors. I'll just point out that this is not a situation where you've got somebody with a man with a lot of authority or a woman with a lot of authority taking advantage of a junior staffer much younger than them who's, like a fragile intern that might be easily made to feel intimidated by, a powerful boss. This was, a very senior, well-regarded, intelligent, mature woman who decided of her own volition to have an affair with her boss.
And let me put to you what her complaint was on film. She was unhappy that she was having an affair with him at the time and didn't like that when they had to walk into the winter ball, he wanted to walk in with her on, next to him. She was worried that she was being treated as an ornament because of the way she looked. And this is after she went to all the trouble of buying a floor-length red dress and having her hair and makeup done. She was then concerned about looking pretty in front of the camera. I think she was more worried about what might happen to her marriage if anybody saw her walking in on his arm. And
she was married too, right?
I think so. I think the documentary said they were both married with kids.
Delightful.
But that's the kind of substance of the argument. She was worried about looking like an ornament. Give me a break. She'd be upset if people didn't look at her and didn't like how she looked.
I don't want to even know what they're up to, frankly, and I honestly do not care. But what I do care about is taxpayers' money being wasted investigating this. And here's what came out in the news later in the week. An ex-staffer for Federal Minister Alan Tudge, this is from The Australian, has made a formal complaint alleging that he made her feel humiliated and caused her to cry. In her complaint to the Department of Finance, Rochelle Miller outlines occasions where Mr. Tudge was allegedly critical of her work in front of other people. Miss Miller said she once cried at an airport when he allegedly repeatedly asked about a Facebook video of the day's media event. I was upset and very tired, so I went to the bathroom and sat there and cried until closer to our departure time in order to avoid him, she wrote in the complaint, according to the ABC. She said she was then further badgered on the plane. She ended up in tears on the plane. The person sitting next... I mean, have you ever had a bad day at work with a bully boss or a mean boss and had a cry? I have.
That was the point at which I burst out laughing and realised that it was all rubbish.
Yeah,
I mean, she's trying to conflate doing a bad job and having a bit of pushback at work with, oh, I'm oppressed because I'm a woman and I slept with my boss. Get over yourself, kids. And generally, all that the public need to know is there a conflict of interest as far as policy goes? If so, you must declare it. If not, please, guys, just act like adults and get on with it. And that's why the stuff with Gladys Berejiklian was different, because the public were worried about a conflict of interest as far as corruption went.
Correct.
Not about who she was sleeping with. It was no one ever cares.
Now, the other minister involved in all of this scandal is Christian Porter, and there was some photo incident in a bar where somebody had taken a photo of him flirting with a young girl in a bar, and then he got hauled up by Malcolm Turnbull and told that he needs to watch his behaviour in public, which I think is perfectly appropriate. He's a minister of the Crown and he needs to be careful. But I think Turnbull's point with him at that stage, I agree with, was he has to be aware that he could be compromised if he gets himself into any sort of blackmail potential situation, which can easily happen. We've just had, as we reported in the show a week or so ago, the head of ASIO warning that there could very much be a lot of active spies from China trying at the moment, and other countries trying to get dirt on Australian politicians, and they need to be really, really careful of it. So it's a serious thing. What's your view of the Christian Porter side of the story?
Well, first of all, can I just say that I'm thrilled.
I know how much you love Christian Porter, Alexander.
This camera is coming back to Christian Porter, not because that he's a guy, but because he writes the worst, most dangerous policy ever. So I can't bring myself to feel sorry for him. I think there's a very big difference between what's been happening in China, where Xi Jinping organises for MPs in Australia to sleep with underage women, records it, and then uses that as blackmail from a foreign nation, and someone getting caught in a bar with a staffer of both legal consent and who works for them in Australia. I don't think the pressure for those two things is in any way related as far as power goes, because, as I said, most people don't really care about MPs sleeping with their staff in Canberra. What it really was, more to the point, is what I said earlier. It was about Malcolm Turnbull's power over his MPs, because he was the one who could release the information about them, and he knew about it when he promoted them. So he obviously wasn't worried about their reputation from the outside. He was more interested in what he could use that way. So I thought that was very revealing. Yeah, that's
Politics
what I think.
is nasty, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Aren't I a naive little puppy? All right, story number 2 this week, which is much, much more important, I think, is the news that the Greens Senator, Sarah Hanson-Young, has decided to push to establish an inquiry into media diversity in Australia. It has been backed by the Senate. She put a motion. It went ahead without opposition from the federal government on Wednesday, and there will be a review set to focus on the dominance of the Murdoch media empire, the influence of media concentration on democracy, and challenges faced by news outlets in the modern digital landscape. This all, of course, came from a petition from Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister, who was calling for a royal commission into the Murdoch media empire that was tabled in Parliament. 500,000 people signed that petition. I would point out that means 24.5 million people didn't sign that petition. It was tabled in Parliament this week, and Senator Hanson-Young has sort of jumped on it and decided to bring that forward. She says that the cosy relationship between the coalition government and News Corp should be scrutinised. Well, yeah, I don't think our media diversity issue has really got to do with Murdoch, which is a free market thing that people can switch on and switch off, or read or buy or not buy as they see fit. It would be more with the ABC, wouldn't it, that we're all forced to pay for at the point of a gun?
The same people who are having a go at this Four Corners thing are the ones who are on the Murdoch Royal Commission thing. So it's all about group publicity, just so everyone understands. That's why they're running these two stories. The Murdoch Royal Commission is basically a one-man vanity project from Kevin Rudd, who is so upset about his own inadequacies that he's decided to hit out against the media who said mean things about him when he was failing as a Prime Minister. And that's doubly true for Turnbull, who's now joined forces, which I think is just hysterical. Basically, the whole idea of the Murdoch Royal Commission, they say it's about media diversity, but what it really is creating a media monopoly for the left by getting rid of their major free market competition, which is, of course, the Murdoch press. Yeah. And when you read through his complaints, I don't know if you saw the original tweet way back in September last year or 2 years ago when he launched it. It was just Kevin Rudd putting out a tweet with about a dozen of the magazine covers from the Murdoch press of mean headlines about his failures as PM. That was it. That was his complaint about the Murdoch press. That's where it all started.
Now we're going to have a costly inquiry into a free market business. I mean, if people don't like Rupert Murdoch, they don't have to buy Rupert Murdoch's papers or watch his TV channels, but they do. So they obviously like what they're getting. That is the free market in action. What is not the free market in action is our beloved ABC, that all of us are forced at the point of a gun, because that's the reality of what it comes down to when you don't pay your taxes. We are forced to pay for the ABC, and we're forced to pay for an organisation that has a particular ideological slant that shouldn't have a particular ideological slant. As for the Murdoch stuff, he can do whatever he wants. The other thing that fascinates me about all of this is the greatest barrier to entry for any company that might want to set up a commercial equivalent of, the conservative talk stations, but from a more left-wing perspective, like the main News Corp competitor in the UK, DMG, Daily Mirror Group, tried to do in Australia with its Vega network. They owned Nova, but before Nova was Nova, it was Vega. And it was an attempt to run kind of a less shock jockey kind of talk station that sounded a little bit more mature, more like the ABC, trying to attract a slightly more upmarket audience with, an appeal to that ABC crowd. It failed because you can't compete with the ABC's competitive advantage, which is that it doesn't have to run commercials.
If you want to really scare the ABC, tell them you're going to do what they did to the BBC, which is make them a voluntary subscription and watch their budget halve overnight, because they know that they have gone all the way to the left and that half the population hate them. But just to back on Rudd for a second to work out how unhinged his views are toward Murdoch, it was only a couple of months ago when the Biden laptop stuff came out, where he claimed on an ABC radio interview that the laptop for Hunter Biden was probably a Ukraine-Russia interference program set up and organized by Murdoch to discredit the Biden campaign as far as a form of media interference similar to what they do to Australia. That's how deranged this person is that we're talking about. And he's trying to tell us there's something wrong with the free market media in Australia by using that kind of justification.
And so what we've seen in recent days is the New York Post published, obviously, an article given to them by the Trump Republican campaign concerning Hunter Biden, Vice President Biden's son, which is sourced, it seems, from dubious sources within the Ukraine, allegations made that they, in fact, could be coming from Russian intelligence. But leaving aside the simple accuracy of the report or not, the bottom line is what's revealed in the New York Times today is that New York Post journalists themselves produced this article. This seems very much from the reporting to be the sort of tactics we've seen in Australia just before an election. Here's a huge scandal against the centre-left challenger, in this case the Biden campaign. I think it's important people know that these tactics seem to be universally applied.
Okay. Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd there, speaking quite rationally, I'm sure, about a Murdoch Ukrainian-Russian conspiracy. I'm not sure that the Ukraine and Russia work together on stuff all that often, but anyhow. All right, that was Kevin Rudd on ABC Radio National's Drive Time program in October. Just so you know, folks, because we're all going to be paying for this inquiry into the Murdoch media that we have every free choice not to purchase if we don't want to and not to watch if we don't want to, but apparently we need our big state government politicians and leaders interfering with our free media. Meanwhile, they take money from us to run another media outlet, which has a centre-left persuasion or even a far-left persuasion. It's fascinating stuff, Ellie.
Complete lunacy stuff. And we're talking about conspiracy theories. That is definitely a conspiracy theory.
Yep. Alexandra, just one final thing I want to chat about is the this call for the national anthem lyrics to be changed from Australians all let us rejoice for we are young and free to Australians all let us rejoice for we are one and free. What's your thoughts about that? The change, of course, being asked for because it's felt that it will be more inclusive of the Indigenous Australians who are obviously, their nation, the First Nation as they see it, is not young, but 40,000 plus years old.
This is actually rubbish from Gladys Berejiklian, who's trying to get rid of bad headlines against her. Yeah. She's trying to appeal to the woke social justice press, hoping they'll give her a bit of better coverage if she bows. And this is actually an old request, by the way, to change young. And I'm sure this circulates every Australia Day.
Yeah, normally I can't stand these sort of, change the name of this, change the name of that sort of PC things, but this one doesn't bother me too much. It's I kind of get it, and it isn't that much of a huge change to anything. If it does make a few people feel better, then why not? Here's what Gladys Berejiklian had to say.
To say we're young and free, it really ignores the fact that for tens of thousands of years our First Nations have inhabited this continent. And it's just a word, it's just symbolic, but I think everything matters. Respect and dignity is important, and I feel really upset when, whether it's elite athletes or anybody else, don't feel the anthem reflects them and who they are. And I think if we at least recognise that we have a proud First Nations culture and a continuing culture here in Australia, that one word might make a difference for some people.
Yeah, Gladys Berejiklian, New South Wales Premier there, speaking once again on the Today Show on Channel 9. We've had a lot of Gladys in the show today. She's saying it's just one word. If it makes people feel better, I'd be okay with it if it stopped people kneeling in protest at the national anthem. But Ellie, you're not buying it.
This is just Gladys trying to avoid her bonking ban, should we call it, at this point in time. And it's rubbish. It's a sliding slope. There's no way that they'll be happy with changing one word in the anthem. They want to get rid of Australia Day. They want to destroy our flag. They want to get rid of the entire idea of Australian nationhood. And so you just don't give an inch to radical Marxists because there's no end point for them. So everything you give them just gets worse. I don't know if you've seen what's happening in America right now, but the Marxists, Black Lives Matter, have already come after the Biden campaign, demanding payment basically for helping the Democrats, what we assume, to win the election. So we shouldn't be playing the same games that they do, and Gladys Berejiklian should know better than to get involved. It won't save her career, it won't make the press any nicer to her, and it will alienate her base. It's the wrong thing to do.
All right. Ellie Melly, thank you very much for your time once again. Ellie Melly is on Twitter at Ellie Melly, ELLYMELLY. Alexandra Marshall, thank you very much for joining us, and we will catch up again next week.
Thank you for having me, Kuri.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of The Other Side Australia, episode number 12, and we will be back next Friday. If anything happens between now and then that's huge, we will have a special edition pop up, so keep your eye out for that around about Monday or Tuesday perhaps. Otherwise, we will see you again on Friday morning. And if you'd like to support the show, please don't forget the best way to do so is simply to tell your friends and to share the podcast links on social media for us. That really is the best way to help us. If you'd like to help us financially, hop onto Subscribe Star. You can sponsor us there if you just look up The Other Side Australia. Don't forget we're on YouTube. If you've got friends who aren't into podcasts so much and they just want easy access, YouTube is the best place. We're also on all the major podcast platforms as well. So I hope you have a great week. looking forward to some sanity coming back to the world in the next few weeks, perhaps, and we'll get some resolution in the US election. It has been quite a few weeks, so we look forward to perhaps a quieter end to the year. And next week on the other side, I'm hoping to get some COVID news back in, having some good news. It's nice to finish with some good news, and that is that the death rates for COVID have really, really plummeted. We've now got the Pfizer trials on the vaccine coming along very well. The markets are up. Things are looking good for 2021. So stay happy, stay positive, and we'll see you again next Friday. Here's one for all our friends in Canberra to take us out.
I'll be yours if you let me hold you tight, but I don't know if you let me in, yeah. I know you had your heart broken one too many times, and now it's hard for you to open up. They have been cruel to you, saying things they don't mean. They have been rude to you, disrespect how you feel, but baby, I'll never go that far, 'cause I know better than that. So baby, let me hold you, hold you. I wanna show you, show you, show you how to treat you right, treat you right. Pull you closer through the highs and lows. Yeah, I wanna show you how to treat you right, treat you right. Let me show you what love is and why it's beautiful. Just put your body on top of